People always ask, how do you transition from painting in the streets to painting on canvas? For my generation, there wasn't much of a transition because I was keeping sketchbooks, painting on canvases, and also painting in the streets. To me, I saw it as art. There was no transition or division.
Initially, one of the things that I've been reflecting on throughout my time here at PAMM and as a curator is the stories that not only are told here in Miami, but the stories that have been inspired by the city. And so to some people it might sound a bit strange that I would be interested in working with an artist who hasn't been living in Miami for quite some time, who's been living in New York. But the truth is that if you look at the work, you see Miami in it. And that was what initially drew me to bring this work home, to be able to tell the story in the city that really inspired a lot of the color palette and a lot of the subject matter. And I thought it was really important to remind people that we're living in a Miami now that has created and nurtured an environment where artists can live and work. But that hasn't always been the case. There have been a lot of artists who have had to leave the city and establish themselves elsewhere. New York is a pretty prominent example of that. But Miami doesn't leave you, right? Miami doesn't leave you, it doesn't leave the work. And I think Jose's work is a really good example of that, of the fact that he spent a lot of time here as a kid and that Miami remained with him. And so Homecoming is really about bringing the work home.
In 1980, a critic for the New York Times wrote that Miami was a cultural wasteland. And I think there were a group of people down here who loved Miami and really wanted to prove that critic wrong.
Between 1986 and 1989, I was painting all the time. And in 1988, my art teacher at Miami Coral Park Senior High entered one of my, an unfinished illustration painting in the Scholastic Art Award competition.
I remember the words Graffiti City as being yellow.
Yeah.
Were they?
There was a lot of colors. It was yellow and red.
The word Graffiti City was at the top.
Yeah.
And right underneath that, you start with the tops of the buildings and you move right down.
It was the landscape of downtown Miami.
Yeah, we saw it when we drove on it. That's Graffiti City because the bridge was there, you know, and all the buildings were there. But I hadn't seen a finished graffiti piece of yours. You're always there with the markers, and I'm thinking this is going to be trouble. But of course, it wasn't trouble. But I was brainwashed to think that kids with markers were going to make mischief. But you didn't. You just made beautiful art. And that piece that you did, called Graffiti City, captured Miami absolutely perfectly. And there are the words Graffiti City in yellow. And I thought, for the first time in history, I think that we should enter a piece of graffiti into the Scholastic Art exhibit, which is the biggest in the country.
But it was also extremely touching to know that his art teacher came to the museum, walked the show with him, and that she got to see the fruits of her labor too, right? And that's what makes arts education so important, is that you never know exactly how that will develop within a young person, and she got to witness that.
And that got me to travel to Boston that year, which was the Nationals. And that kind of was like a real changing point for me because it exposed me to artists, young artists from all around the country, and music, and just being able to see what everybody else was doing, and also seeing a different city. It was, seeing Boston and New York at that time was really mind-blowing, because we got to see museums and things that really didn't exist in Miami at that time.
As an outsider, he didn't stop. You know, because he wasn't recognized, he didn't stop. The work kept going. The community of artists who were supporting each other kept going. You know, and he was a young kid without much backing, relying, it was a community that helped each other, shared with each other their drawings, shared tags, you know, so community is super, super important for a young artist. And they should find it, you know, that's a really important thing.
So Jose's journey and my journey really came through a small library called the Westgate Regional Library on Coral Way and 97th, I think. And in that library, we had older friends who had an art show of breaking art, subway art, and their black books, really professionally done, with vitrines, framed work, paintings, drawings, watercolors. And so that gave us a context to understanding that the work that we were doing was important and that it didn't only belong in the streets, that there was a possibility of transference.
In Miami, there was very few opportunities, but around the age of 10, I got totally hooked on writing culture. And, you know, like what came down from New York, known as subway art, and all of that style was really taking off in Miami and had its own kind of developmental stages of Miami style. There are times where you're from a place and you had difficult times there, like I had difficult times in Miami. And there were times that I had a love-hate relationship with Miami.
And many of terrific artists, Teresita Fernandez, and Jose, had to move because you kind of, the perception was you couldn't make a career in Miami. And I think that has shifted. But I would also say the talent was here. It was whether the curators of the time were interested in what was here, because there was a lot of the street art, a lot of hip hop, and that wasn't considered art at the time. They were considered outsiders.
You know, I think it's undeniable the sort of impression Jose has left and sort of his development and the path he took from graffiti into what he's doing now. It's, I don't think it's an easy path. I think it's like, there's a lot of hurdles, there's a lot of walls, glass ceilings put around you, you know, and his persistence and, you know, developing into the artist that he is today.
His paintings have, you know, his energy lives within his painting, and I have to say he's an easy person to get to know because he always gives 100% of himself.
I've always dreamt of sharing all of these years, the accumulation of who I've become, because, you know, I've changed so much. I left Miami when, you know, I was 15 years old, and I've gone back many times, but to bring the accumulation of who I've become through my painting and sharing my world view, my gaze on the planet and my aspect of living and mark making and creating with my hometown, I feel like I'm a messenger, like I'm sharing, but I'm also paying homage and giving thanks to what Miami did for me.
When Jose went into a coma as a result of COVID-19, we all felt so connected to him. And that's when I really understood the power of a life. When we got on Zoom and there were people crying, like, but again, they were like all over the world. And like, you know, some people who I want their autograph. And we're just like, to feel the love and to like know that how meaningful his life is to so many people whose lives mean something to others was really profound.
Jose is one of those people who you long for as a friend. He's always there for you, and so it doesn't really surprise me to know that when he needed his artist community, when he was very sick with COVID and in the hospital in a coma, all of his friends turned out for him. And when I mean turned out, they weren't just helping him get really great medical care and attention, but there were every single week global vigils of prayer from the art world. These are people who are generally atheists, and they moved to prayer because they love Jose so much.
You knew as soon as I saw him, his strength and his character was there. He couldn't move, he couldn't talk, but you could just see it was Jose, and nothing was going to take that away. not even COVID. And I just felt it. And you know, you of course a little fearful that it's just a feeling maybe, but it really came true. And Jose is Jose, and Jose will always be Jose. And you know, that's the strength of his character. He has so much energy inside of him that is about positivity, looking from the dark to the light.
His work is what saved him as well. He was working while he was sleeping. I think artists work 24/7. No one can tell you that, oh, I just take my 9 to 5. No, you may go to your studio from 9 to 5, but you're working 24/7. He put it up a notch and went into high gear. That's how invested he is in his work, that even under that state, that condition, he was not able to lay down his brushes. And it was almost a rehearsal while he slept for what he was intending to do.
Jose went through one of the most difficult experiences I've ever heard of. And the way he approached it and the way he used his art, I mean, one of the first things he did was to ask for a pencil, to ask for paints. And that says so much about him. I think a lot of people could have been completely defeated by it, and for him it was almost like a reemergence. And I think if you look at the art that came after that period, it is so, you know, the pieces that he created with the horizon line, I mean, they're so stunning and powerful, and you know, a great growth and progression in his practice. And I just think that says so much about him and his character, that, you know, something that could have been devastating for most people, he took as an opportunity to, you know, use art and music to heal, and to come back better and stronger, and you know, ready to take on the world.
Jose was able to get out of the coma, and with family help and myself, being able to bring him art materials and letting him do watercolors and drawings and music. He had his vinyl records. He loves to play music, as you know. All these things became a sort of like, besides the love of the family, it was like a love therapy and art therapy. It was hard, but it was a magical moment to be able to see him take baby steps. And I knew that once he got up and started to do that Jose was going to be back, and that no matter how hard the therapy would have been, that was not going to be nothing. It's just a matter of time and space and believing and praying and hoping that, okay, he's going to make it.
In terms of how Jose's work has changed since the illness and since that time in the hospital, to me, the works feel significantly more personal. And I think that there's also an element of really celebrating the body more than ever before. And anyone who has seen Jose paint is aware of the fact that it's a very physical thing. There's a lot of jumping, there's a lot of movement, it's almost like a dance. And so that inspired the open studio. But I would say that this body of work, it references the body in a way that I don't think I had seen before. A lot of the gestures are reminiscent of veins, reminiscent of the actual things that keep your body moving, right? The diptych is a reference to his lungs. And so what you're seeing is his lungs in action, his lungs healing post-COVID. So the work to me is incredibly hopeful in that it references that healing. And it allows for us to really understand what that journey was like for him. You know, we'll never really know, but it gives us an insight. And that's really what visitors seek, right? Is a way to connect with the artist through the work. We initially started really thinking about the show in 2021. And I visited his studio with the intention of just talking to him about whether or not he was interested in having a show at the museum and what that show could potentially look like. And so Of course, the initial conversations are absolutely nothing like what the show ended up being, right? The process is always long and it requires a lot of brainstorming, and we change our minds and we shape shift the show into what we believe will be the very best idea, right? The best iteration. And so we initially just kind of started thinking about what it would mean for him to come back to Miami and reflected on that, but we didn't have a specific idea. And as the conversations went on and as he started to kind of experiment with his work, we got the idea that the studio, recreating the studio, would be something that would be really important to us and to the visitors.
Homecoming to me is, of course, coming back to the place where I'm from. But it also is philosophically about the body as the temple, as the home. And the notion that every single person looks at homecoming and looks at the temple totally differently. And being from Miami is also being from a region that in the United States is representative of Latin America and the Caribbean. So for me, it's an homage for me to come back and have this conversation about the places I've been while always keeping home at heart. And that wherever I've been throughout the world, I'm being representative of the place that I'm from.
When it came to hanging the show, we did encounter a few challenges, right? Because these are very large-scale paintings, and these are paintings that generally, they need some space to breathe, right? They need some room to be able to kind of captivate an audience and to stand alone. And we were trying to figure out what the best way to do that was, but also fitting them all in the space. And so that can kind of be a bit of a challenge, but we were able to figure it out. What we essentially created was a space where you have enough room to back up, you have enough room to see the work from a distance, but also come up close and see the details. You also have the opportunity to see them in conversation with each other, right? We wanted people to be able to compare the works, right? How does the color palette shift from one work to another? Are there certain colors and patterns that you see throughout the exhibition, right? And I think that the way we hung the show allows you to see that. You do have moments where a kind of yellow strip of paint will continue on to the painting right next to it, right? And so we wanted that magic to remain. And PAMM's prep and registration team are incredible and gave us the time that we needed to move something 6 inches to the left. Actually, you know what? No, can we switch it? Can we actually move this painting back to the other wall where we originally had it, three times? And so we wanted to really play, and we did have a chance to play. And then the studio elements, where you have this table and the records and all of these things, that was also an experiment, right? We needed to figure out what the right way to do that was gonna be.
I've always wanted, just to feel very natural about this installation. And what I like is that right now, it's kind of like left as it was when I finished working.
Yeah.
And I really like the idea that all of this crushed pigment is here with the paint kind of scattered. And but I think it's important to, like you said, also curate this together and kind of decide what is visually more striking, or kind of have a conversation about it, because every little detail matters. What the show is about is the power of abstraction, but how abstraction can take certain gestural mark making and how it weaves together color, geographies, history, collage, and the element of layering, the process of layering memory through paint, and how paint itself is, as a medium that is morphing, that it's changing, and that throughout the last few years that I've been working on this body of work, the layering process itself is as challenging as life itself.
The thing I love about Jose's work is that for me, I can see where exactly it came from. I've watched him grow into it over the years, and just from early mark making and tags, and seeing that become more of like a hieroglyphic that gets more and more abstract. But if you start to follow the line work, you can see like the foundation of it, the lettering and the storytelling, and it's he's been on this path for a long time, but I think he's developed a lot in material and execution, and it's just gotten so rich over the years.
Jose has a masterful technique. Artists love him not just for the person that he is, but they love and appreciate deeply his masterful technique in painting. And that can't be understated. Artists, you have to, when artists love an artist, you have to pay attention. And he's one of those artists that other artists have great respect for because he's excellent at what he does.
What astonished me about this show was the great leap forward. And I'm really going to call it a great leap forward because if you think about somebody who's having hallucinations of place when they're in a coma, if you look at somebody who touched death in a way, who was above the body, looking down, that is so reflected in the paintings of this exhibition.
The transition becomes very clear from someone who was working initially on walls in public spaces to then kind of recreating the layers of those walls in a painting. To me, undoubtedly, Jose is a painter, but that's not to say that it didn't start with a slightly different or untraditional, unconventional way of getting there. And so you see that transition, I think, very clearly in the exhibition, but you also still see a remnants of the walls themselves, the layering. A lot of the stuff that you see in some of these paintings are actually advertisements from that were on walls here in Miami that he removed and then put into the paintings and layered the paintings. And so that's why really these paintings take so much time, is because they are layered and layered and layered, and then layers are removed, paint is added, paper is added, things like that. And so that transition from young kid working in the street to being a very serious painter who still references that is very clear within the exhibition.
Art has so many ways of defining itself, and these works are not immediately comprehensible as a kind of clear idea of art. At first, your first reaction is just kind of big and wow, and there's lines and things, but the closer you get to them, the more you see of how human they really are. And the moves and the layers all start to reveal themselves much in the same way as the gallery setup does. The exhibition reveals itself, and then the paintings reveal themselves the closer you get. So I believe many visitors will remember the energy, but also the detail, in something that was very unexpected for many visitors to understand there could be that level of detail.
I think he'll be remembered as someone that heroically did something different from everyone else. And that in that process, he was able to discover something that is both beautiful, powerful. His works to me are like sewing the fabric of life.
You can never tell what an artist's legacy will be in time, but what's for sure is he's poured all his energy and heart into all the works he's created and his vision. And that energy still transpires through any of his canvas or any of the works he's ever done. So each time I see one of his paintings, I feel his strength, his power, his energy, his whole being poured inside. So, we always wonder as an artist, what do we leave behind? And we kind of, it's like a mark of a passage on Earth. It's like I was here in a way. And sometimes it's a way also to connect to someone's emotion of a different time. And when you see Jose's work, there's no doubt that you connect with that emotion because he really poured all of it inside the canvas.
This exhibition, from the very fluid ideas that we had back in 2021 to now, you know, it just makes me extremely proud because so much work went into this, but it wasn't possible without having a certain faith in the community, in the city of Miami, to welcome this show with open arms and to believe truly that it is a part of Miami's history.
It's not about me. Homecoming is about all people finding their place, finding their home, asking the question, what is home? And how can I make my place safe? And how can, if my place becoming safe, help others have safe spaces? That's what I think homecoming is.